Nestled in the rolling suburbs of Greenfield County, Suncrest Park seemed like the embodiment of the American dream. The houses shone in neat rows, each with a perfectly manicured lawn, decorative mailboxes that lined the sidewalks like soldiers, and flower beds that burst with color in spring. Families moved here for the promise of quiet streets, good schools, and a homeowners association that, at least in the marketing brochures, existed only to maintain community standards. Behind the glossy veneer, however, lay an undercurrent of tension. The Suncrest Park Homeowners Association, the governing body that enforced the many rules, was known among locals for its rigidity. Its bylaws filled a thick binder, covering everything from approved fencing materials to the precise days lawn watering was permitted. If you violated any stipulation, no matter how minor, you would soon receive a polite but threatening letter in your mailbox. Presiding over this labyrinth of regulations was Marjorie Caldwell, the middle-aged treasurer of the HOA who acted more like a monarch than a volunteer board member. While her official title was treasurer, everyone knew she was the real power behind the scenes. She showed up to every committee meeting, made on-the-spot inspections, and inundated neighbors with compliance notices. Her officious manner, combined with a habit of reprimanding everyone in earshot, earned her the nickname Karen. Marjorie's outward appearance was as immaculate as the neighborhood's landscaping. She wore pressed linen pantsuits, her short blonde hair styled meticulously, and she drove a spotless SUV that bore the HOA's parking pass on the windshield. She prided herself on knowing each bylaw by heart, and she saw herself as a steadfast guardian of community standards. Anyone who failed to meet her expectations soon found themselves on the wrong side of an official complaint, or worse. Despite her unwavering dedication to control, most residents, worn down by the countless rules, merely sighed in resignation. After all, Suncrest Park streets were lined with pretty houses that consistently rose in value, and many neighbors believed that tolerating Marjorie's heavy hand was the price of living in an upscale community. No one yet realized how far Karen would eventually go to assert her authority, an act that would unravel the peaceful facade of Suncrest Park and send her on a collision course with the law. Paula and Robert Sandoval pulled up to their newly purchased home on a bright Saturday morning. Moving vans rumbled close behind. The couple had saved for years to afford a house in such a tidy, quiet neighborhood, hoping it would provide a stable environment for their two children, Bella, 9, and Jordan, 5. They had heard rumors that Suncrest Park's HOA was strict, but they figured it couldn't be any worse than the condo association they had dealt with in their previous residence. At least, they thought, they would finally have a larger space, a two-story home with a fenced backyard, where the kids could run around. The family had barely finished unloading the first set of boxes when a crisp white SUV appeared, gliding down the street as though on a mission. Sure enough, the vehicle slowed in front of the Sandovals' driveway. Out stepped Marjorie Caldwell, wearing tan slacks and a tailored shirt embroidered with the HOA logo. She approached with a purposeful stride. Paula set down a box, wiped her brow, and forced a smile. "Hello there," she called, hoping to make a friendly first impression. Marjorie offered a thin-lipped smile in return. "Good afternoon. I'm Marjorie Caldwell, treasurer of the HOA, and, well, I oversee a lot of community matters." She cast an appraising glance over the Sandoval's possessions scattered on the driveway. "Just wanted to welcome you to Suncrest Park and, of course, remind you to check our guidelines regarding moving trucks and curbside hours. We have specific rules about large vehicles obstructing the street." Robert frowned, but kept his tone polite. "We'll be sure to move the trucks as soon as possible. We appreciate the heads up." Marjorie nodded, then quickly pivoted to address Bella, who was pulling a small wagon in the front yard. "We do require that children's toys are brought inside after sundown, or stored in the backyard if possible. We don't want the neighborhood looking cluttered." Bella simply stared at Marjorie, unsure how to respond. Paula placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We'll remember that," Paula said calmly, resisting an urge to roll her eyes. Marjorie bestowed a curt smile, then handed Paula a glossy pamphlet. "This includes our bylaws, plus some helpful do's and don'ts. We pride ourselves on maintaining a safe, orderly community. If you ever have questions, don't hesitate to call me directly." With that, she walked away, as though she'd inspected a crime scene and found minor infractions but no immediate cause for alarm. Paula and Robert exchanged weary glances. They had been in Suncrest Park for less than an hour, and already the HOA had made its presence known. But they shrugged it off. If following a few rules kept the peace, they could manage. Little did they know how quickly their patience would be tested. Life in Suncrest Park settled into a routine for the Sandovals. Bella started attending a nearby elementary school, while Jordan, fascinated by the new surroundings, spent afternoons racing toy cars on the sidewalk. Paula, a freelance graphic designer, worked from home, enjoying the quiet blocks of time when Jordan napped. Robert commuted daily to the nearby city for his financial analyst job. Within a month of moving in, they realized that many small, strange rules governed their daily lives. For instance, the HOA mandated that trash bins could only be placed on the curb after 6 p.m. the night before collection, and had to be removed by 8 a.m. the following morning. Yard decorations required prior approval, including something as trivial as a seasonal wreath. Parking a car overnight on the street was not officially forbidden, but there were constant reminders that the HOA encouraged everyone to use their driveways. But what struck Paula most was how often Marjorie Caldwell drove by, sometimes multiple times a day. She would circle the neighborhood, presumably monitoring yard maintenance or checking if people's lawns were at the correct height. On a few occasions, Paula caught her jotting notes into a small spiral-bound pad when she spotted anything that seemed off: a lawnmower left out, a basketball hoop near the curb, or a stray advertisement taped to a mailbox. "It's like she's a hall monitor for the entire neighborhood," Robert joked one night. "Are we in middle school again?" Paula pursed her lips. "We just have to stay out of her crosshairs. If we keep our place tidy and follow the rules, she'll have nothing to complain about." Robert shrugged. "Sure, but I have a feeling she'll always find something." Paula had to admit she felt the same. Yet they both believed that if they didn't rock the boat, they could coexist peacefully with Ms. Caldwell and the HOA. It wouldn't be too long, however, before that illusion crumbled under the pressure of Marjorie's crusade to control every aspect of Suncrest Park. One evening, Robert had to work late. Paula put the kids to bed and settled into the living room with a cup of tea, enjoying a rare moment of calm. She heard the roar of Robert's car in the driveway around 10:30 p.m. Normally, he parked inside the garage, but this time he was exhausted from an incredibly long commute and left the sedan halfway down the driveway, its bumper sticking a foot or so onto the sidewalk. Early the next morning, Paula opened the front door to pick up the newspaper and spotted an envelope taped to the door. The letter, on official HOA letterhead, stated, "Notice of parking violation. Dear residents at 1506, Willow Court, we have observed that your vehicle encroached upon the sidewalk on September 15th at approximately 10:42 p.m. This is a violation of the Suncrest Park guidelines, which prohibit blocking pedestrian walkways. Please ensure all vehicles are fully on the driveway or in the garage to avoid fines. Failure to correct this behavior may result in additional action. Sincerely, Marjorie Caldwell, Treasurer, Suncrest Park HOA." Paula exhaled, frustration flickering inside her. It seemed borderline obsessive that Marjorie would be watching their driveway that late, let alone issuing an official notice after a single incident. But she handed the letter to Robert without making a scene, and he gave a resigned shrug. "We'll keep an eye on where we park from now on," he said, folding the letter. "No big deal." Still, the notice confirmed their growing suspicion. Marjorie Caldwell was not going to let even the smallest infraction slide. Suncrest Park, for all its polish, wasn't completely devoid of warmth. Over time, the Sandovals met a few friendly neighbors who shared stories about living under the HOA. During a weekend barbecue at the home of Antonio and Rachel Diaz, Paula and Robert got an earful. Rachel, flipping burgers on the grill, lowered her voice as she spoke. "We've been here 7 years. You should have seen how normal things were before Marjorie got on the board. She used to be sweet enough, always volunteering for cleanup days. But once she was elected treasurer, it's like she got a taste of power. Now she acts like she runs the entire county." Antonio nodded. "We had her come by once with a ruler to measure the height of our hedges. She claimed they were 1 inch above the regulation limit. Cost us $100 to have them trimmed professionally, or else she threatened to fine us daily. It's ridiculous." Paula felt her jaw drop. "A single inch? That's so petty." Rachel let out a mirthless laugh. "Welcome to Suncrest Park. Every day is an opportunity for Marjorie to find something wrong, especially if she thinks you're a troublemaker. Before Paula could ask what troublemaker meant, another neighbor chimed in, Shannon Gwynn, who lived down the street. She's big on parking rules. Don't leave your car on the street overnight. Don't let visitors park by the curb for more than a couple hours. And her most recent obsession is unauthorized vehicles. I heard she's even threatened to have cars towed if they don't have a neighborhood permit. Never mind that the county doesn't require any special permit. Robert sipped his lemonade, scowling. So this is normal? She's just out there patrolling. Pretty much, Shannon said. We don't want trouble, so we do what she says, but it's gotten out of hand. As the conversation continued, it became clear that while many residents hated these tactics, few spoke up. Why? Because they were afraid of retaliation, fines, official complaints, or even drawn-out legal disputes. Marjorie Caldwell seemed to have a knack for making life miserable for anyone who dared challenge her authority. Paula exchanged a look with Robert. They could either keep their heads down or risk becoming one of Marjorie's examples. But neither approach guaranteed peace. A few weeks passed in relative calm. The Sandovals meticulously avoided any further parking slip-ups. Paula made sure no garden hoses lay out, and any children's toys were promptly returned to the garage at sundown. The family hoped that by demonstrating their willingness to conform, Marjorie would turn her attention elsewhere. Their efforts seemed to pay off. No new violation notices arrived. But Paula observed a lingering presence of the white SUV rolling by, and Robert swore he caught Marjorie snapping pictures of their yard from across the street. Paranoia began to creep in. Even Bella joked one night that the HOA lady is always watching us. Though they kept quiet, the family found themselves increasingly anxious, worried that a single lapse in memory, maybe forgetting to pull the trash bins in on time, would trigger another letter or confrontation. Paula confided in Rachel Diaz about the stress. Rachel just shook her head sympathetically and said, "That's life here under Marjorie. We either deal with it, or we fight." For the time being, the Sandovals dealt with it. However, events were unfolding that would soon sweep them into a confrontation more intense than any they imagined. Marjorie Caldwell's desire for total control was about to escalate from nuisance-level meddling to illegal enforcement. In another context, it might have been possible to feel sympathy for Marjorie Caldwell. She lived alone in a pristine two-story house on Pinecrest Drive. Her husband had passed away a decade earlier. Her son had moved to another state and rarely visited. Becoming treasurer of the HOA gave her a new sense of identity and purpose. She thrived on responsibilities that made her feel important. Maintaining Suncrest Park's standards became her mission, but her dedication came at a cost. Marjorie frequently alienated people who tried to befriend her. Instead of forging connections, she built a rigid world in which every minor rule was to be upheld without question. Those who complied, she believed, should be grateful for her leadership. Those who dissented, well, they were enemies of Suncrest Park. After a few years of running the HOA finances expertly, her background was in accounting, Marjorie expanded her role. She drafted new rules, adding them to the ever-growing bylaws, many of which the broader community barely read before they were implemented. She convinced the board to give her authority over enforcement measures, which she interpreted to mean almost any action short of actual law enforcement. Rumors swirled that she once confronted a delivery driver for blocking a mailbox and threatened to have the driver blacklisted from the community. She posted signs around the neighborhood stating unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense, even though the board never officially approved such a policy. To Marjorie, private roads equaled private law, and it was only a matter of time before she found a new violation to tackle, one that would give her an opportunity to flex the full extent of her self-appointed power. About 3 months after the Sandovals moved in, a small cul-de-sac on Maple Grove Street became the setting for a dispute over visitor parking. A group of teenagers who attended a local high school sometimes parked their used sedan there to share rides. Technically, Maple Grove was still within Suncrest Park boundaries, but the cul-de-sac itself was rarely patrolled, given that it was a quieter area. Nevertheless, Marjorie Caldwell took notice. She spotted the teenage drivers from her daily rounds, suspected they didn't live in the neighborhood, and decided that they were in violation of residential parking-only guidelines. Never mind that no official city signs indicated such a restriction. Marjorie took it upon herself to threaten towing. The tension escalated until one evening. One of the teenagers found a bright orange sticker plastered to the sedan's window, reading "Illegal parking, subject to immediate towing." Terrified, the kids moved their car and stopped using the cul-de-sac altogether. To them, it felt like crossing an invisible border patrolled by a self-righteous warden. For most residents, this was an anecdote shared in hushed conversations. "Can she do that?" they asked each other. No one really knew. Some pointed out that if the roads were maintained by the county, Marjorie had no right to threaten towing. Others were too fearful to test the waters. In this uneasy climate, a more serious confrontation loomed, one that would involve not just threatening a sticker, but a physical immobilization of someone's vehicle. And that act would prove to be Marjorie's undoing. One Saturday morning, Paula's parents flew in from out of state to spend a long weekend with the Sandovals. The family planned a barbecue to celebrate, inviting a few local friends and neighbors. The day was warm and bright, with just enough breeze to keep the heat tolerable. Cars soon lined the curb near the Sandovals' home. Their driveway could fit 2 vehicles, but Paula's parents had driven a rental car, and other guests had arrived separately. By midday, 4 additional cars were parked along the street, directly in front of the Sandovals' property. Paula felt a tiny pang of anxiety. Would Marjorie or the HOA take issue with so many vehicles parked at once? Then again, this was broad daylight on a weekend, and the guests weren't blocking anyone's driveway. She reminded herself that, in a normal neighborhood, this would be a non-issue. The festivities began. Music played softly, burgers and hot dogs sizzled on the grill, and Bella and Jordan laughed as their grandparents chased them around the yard. Neighbors who attended brought side dishes, coleslaw, baked beans, fruit salad. Conversations flowed under the shade of an old oak tree. Around 2 p.m., Robert noticed a white SUV slow near the house. He recognized the license plate. "Paula," he murmured, "Marjorie's here." Paula's stomach tightened slightly. "As long as no one's blocking the street or sidewalk, we're fine, right?" Robert exhaled, not entirely convinced. "Sure, we should be. But it's Karen we're talking about." They returned to mingling, hoping nothing would come of it. They were wrong. By late afternoon, the guests started leaving. Paula's parents decided to stay behind for dinner, so the only remaining car on the street belonged to a friend who had carpooled earlier, a silver sedan parked directly at the curb next to the Sandovals' mailbox. Its owner, Cindy Alvarez, was inside the house helping Paula with dishes. Robert stepped out to the front porch for some fresh air. That's when he spotted Marjorie Caldwell kneeling at the rear wheel of the silver sedan, apparently fumbling with some contraption. At first, Robert was too puzzled to speak. But as he walked closer, he recognized the bright yellow device attached to the tire, a wheel clamp, commonly called a car boot. Heart pounding, Robert confronted her. "Marjorie, what are you doing?" Marjorie stood, brushing off her slacks, her expression one of unwavering authority. "This car has been parked here for over 4 hours without a Suncrest Park guest pass. That's a direct violation of our parking bylaws." Robert's voice climbed. "What bylaws? You can't just boot someone's car on a public street. This is county property. This is an HOA matter," Marjorie snapped, crossing her arms. "Under the rules, any unauthorized vehicle can be immobilized or towed at the discretion of the association's enforcement official. And that official is me." Robert's anger flared. "First off, we never agreed to any new rule about booting cars. Second, even if the HOA had that policy, you don't have the legal authority to enforce it with a boot." Marjorie didn't budge. "I absolutely do. It was unanimously approved at the last board meeting." She lifted her chin. "If the owner wants her car released, she can contact me and pay the fine." Shocked, Robert whipped out his phone. "I'm calling Paula, and probably the police." Marjorie shrugged. "You can call whomever you want. This is private enforcement, well within my rights as treasurer. The car can stay locked until the fine is settled." Robert stormed back to the house, disbelief and fury coursing through him. The next few moments would determine whether Marjorie's brazen act stood or was swiftly dismantled by the actual law. When Robert explained the situation, Cindy Alvarez turned pale. "She booted my car? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't even see a sign about needing a permit." Paula felt her own rage bubbling. Enough was enough. "I'm going out there to talk to her." The group marched to the curb, Paula, Robert, Cindy, plus Paula's father, who had once been a deputy sheriff in his younger days. Marjorie stood by the silver sedan, arms folded, posture radiating smugness. Cindy confronted her first. "Take that thing off my car. I've never even heard of a permit for a daytime visit. We're not in some private lot." Marjorie repeated her stance, voice dripping with condescension. "I have every right to enforce community regulations. Your host should have registered your vehicle with the HOA for extended on-street parking. This is in the rules." Paula's father stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell, you do realize that booting a vehicle without legal authority can be considered tampering with private property, maybe even theft of property rights?" A flash of uncertainty crossed Marjorie's face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I'm the treasurer of the HOA, and I was granted enforcement powers. If you have a complaint, file it with the board. Meanwhile, the car stays booted until the fine is paid. That's $150, plus an additional $25 for each hour it remains parked illegally." Cindy looked outraged. "You're running a racket. I'm calling the police." She dialed 911, hands trembling. The operator, hearing the urgency, promised an officer would arrive soon. A hush fell over the yard. Residents peered out from nearby windows. No one had ever seen Marjorie go to this extreme. A few neighbors even walked over, muttering quietly among themselves about how absolutely insane the situation was. Marjorie maintained her stance, arms still crossed. She didn't show the slightest hint of backing down. In her mind, it was her sworn duty to keep unauthorized vehicles at bay. The notion that she might not have the law on her side seemed not to faze her at all. It took only 15 minutes for a Greenfield County patrol car to appear on the street. A stocky, even-tempered police officer named Officer Glenn Hastings stepped out. He wore dark sunglasses and carried himself with deliberate calm. Cindy rushed forward. "Officer, I'm the one who called. This woman," she pointed at Marjorie, "put a boot on my car without my permission. She's demanding money to remove it." Officer Hastings took in the scene, then approached Marjorie. "Ma'am, can you explain what's going on here?" Marjorie handed him a folded piece of paper, presumably the HOA bylaw. "This vehicle was parked without authorization, in violation of Suncrest Park's parking regulations. We have the right to immobilize unauthorized vehicles." The officer unfolded the paper, skimming its contents. His brows knitted slightly. "Is this a rule recognized by county ordinances? Or is it just an HOA guideline?" Marjorie lifted her chin. "The HOA has broad authority over our roads. They're considered private because the association pays for some maintenance. We can boot or tow if needed." Officer Hastings turned to Robert, Paula, and Cindy. "Do you all live here? Is this indeed a private street maintained by the HOA exclusively?" Paula exhaled. "My husband and I are residents, yes. Cindy is our guest. My understanding is that while the HOA does handle some landscaping and partial upkeep, these roads are still subject to county law. The HOA can't just pass new rules allowing them to boot cars on a whim." Another neighbor, Rachel Diaz, who had joined the gathering, chimed in. "That's right. We never voted on any measure like this. We pay county taxes for these streets." Officer Hastings's expression hardened. "Miss Caldwell, I need to check the official property records. But from my training and experience, private HOAs rarely have the legal authority to immobilize vehicles on public or county-owned roads." He paused. "Also, even if you had some legal claim, you'd typically need to post multiple prominent signs stating a policy about booting or towing, plus provide contact information. It doesn't look like that's happened here." Marjorie's features twitched with annoyance. "Officer, I assure you, the board passed this. We have signs at the community entrance." Hastings frowned, scanning the street. No sign indicating car booting in progress was visible. "I'll need to confirm the specifics. But from first glance, I see a potential violation. You're effectively depriving Ms. Alvarez of her personal property. We call that an illegal detention of her vehicle, or possibly extortion if you're demanding money to release it. Do you understand how serious that is?" Marjorie's face paled. She swallowed but kept her voice steady. "The fine is standard policy." Hastings exchanged a look with Cindy. "Ma'am," he said to Cindy, "you have every right to your car. If she refuses to remove the device, I'll have to escalate this matter." Marjorie's eyes flashed. "You can't do that. I'm an HOA board member. This is association business, not a police matter." Without missing a beat, Officer Hastings said. On the contrary, if you've locked someone's car without legal authority and are demanding payment, that very much is a police matter. By this time, nearly a dozen neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, forming a loose semicircle around the unfolding drama. Whispers flew. Has she lost her mind? She actually booted a car? I heard she's demanding money. The tension was palpable. Paula's father, leaning against a fence, quietly observed Officer Hastings, who was now radioing dispatch for clarity on the local statutes. Marjorie hovered close to him, arms folded in exasperation. Cindy anxiously paced near her immobilized sedan, desperate to see the boot removed. In a matter of minutes, a second patrol car arrived. Out stepped Sergeant Elaine Powers, a senior officer known for her no-nonsense approach. After a brief conversation with Hastings, Sergeant Powers approached Marjorie. Miss Caldwell, I'm told you have fitted a boot onto this vehicle and are demanding payment to remove it, the sergeant began. Marjorie stood rigid. Yes, and I have the authority to do so. Our HOA has rules. Sergeant Powers raised a hand. We've spoken with the county clerk's office. The roads in Suncrest Park are only partially funded by the association, but they remain open to public use. The local code doesn't give the HOA unilateral authority to immobilize vehicles. If a car is truly trespassing on private property, you'd have to follow legal notice procedures or get a court order. But a visitor parked in front of a resident's home is hardly trespassing. Moreover, you can't extort fines from them. Marjorie's indignation flared. This is about protecting our neighborhood. If we don't enforce rules, anyone could dump their cars here. Sergeant Powers remained calm. Be that as it may, you do not have the legal right to boot this car. You are effectively holding Ms. Alvarez's property hostage for money. That can be construed as a criminal act. A tremor passed through Marjorie's posture, but she tried to mask it. This is outrageous. I'm the treasurer. I know the law. Sergeant Powers' voice turned firmer. No, ma'am, you don't have that authority. I'm asking you one last time. Remove the boot immediately and desist from such actions. Marjorie hesitated, defiance raging in her eyes. Everyone waited, breath held, to see what the infamous HOA Karen would do next. Faced with two uniformed officers and a growing audience of neighbors, most people would have backed down. But Marjorie Caldwell considered herself the ultimate rule enforcer. In her mind, the police were simply overstepping, just as everyone else did when they questioned her. She had spent years constructing an unshakable belief that she alone safeguarded Suncrest Park's well-being. When Sergeant Powers repeated her demand, remove the boot or face consequences, Marjorie snapped. She insisted that the officers had no right to meddle in the HOA's internal processes. She declared that she'd be pressing charges against them for harassment. Indeed, she was so blinded by her sense of superiority that she refused to comply. Tension crackled in the air. Paula felt her stomach churn, unsure how things would escalate. Cindy hovered protectively by her trunk, anxious tears in her eyes. The hush among neighbors was absolute. Even small children, usually restless, were silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Sergeant Powers gave Marjorie every opportunity to step down. Ma'am, I'm warning you, you are committing an offense by refusing to release someone's property. Marjorie raised her chin. No, I stand by the HOA's regulations. Sergeant Powers exchanged a glance with Officer Hastings, who gave a slight nod. Then, with measured clarity, the sergeant announced, Ms. Caldwell, you are hereby under arrest for illegal immobilization of private property and attempted extortion. Marjorie's eyes grew wide. She sputtered, This is an outrage. I'm the one in charge here. I'll have you removed from duty. Her words fell to stunned silence as Officer Hastings gently but firmly grasped her wrists and pulled them behind her back, fitting her with handcuffs. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Neighbors watched in disbelief. The very woman who had terrorized them with fines and threats was now being led toward a patrol car as a suspect. Marjorie kept ranting. You can't do this to me. I'm with the HOA. Let go. Her pleas went unanswered. The next moment, she was guided into the back seat of the squad car, door shut firmly behind her. As soon as the police cruiser pulled away, a dissonant mix of emotions swept through the neighbors. Some were stunned, others relieved. Cindy, trembling with a cocktail of anger and disbelief, stared at her still-booted car. The officers had promised a tow truck would arrive soon to remove the device safely. Marjorie had refused to unlock it. Paula hurried to Cindy's side. "I'm so sorry this happened. We had no idea she would go that far." Cindy gave a shaky laugh of incredulity. "I'm just glad the police came. Can you imagine if we lived in a place where she could do this unchallenged? It's insane." Robert, who had seen the entire confrontation, simply exhaled. "Karen's not going to let this go. Even if she's arrested, she'll fight it in court." Rachel Diaz, standing nearby, folded her arms. "Let her fight. She's finally getting a taste of real accountability." Word spread rapidly. By nightfall, Suncrest Park was abuzz with texts, social media posts, and phone calls. Some neighbors, especially those who had faced Marjorie's intimidation for years, felt a sense of vindication, like a heavy yoke had been lifted. Others worried about the community's reputation, fearing that the story would become a spectacle in local news, driving property values down. In truth, the spectacle had only just begun. Marjorie's arrest was a bombshell, but the fallout, legal, social, and financial, would reverberate far beyond a single Sunday afternoon. Within 48 hours, the Suncrest Park HOA board convened an emergency session in the small community meeting hall near the clubhouse. The usual monthly meetings were poorly attended, but this time, the room filled to capacity with concerned residents. Even those who rarely took an interest in HOA politics wanted to know what would happen to Marjorie and whether the board would continue to support her actions. Seated at a long folding table were the remaining board members: Thomas Griswold, president; Stephanie Yates, secretary; Carl Renner, member-at-large; and one empty seat designated for the treasurer, Marjorie Caldwell. Thomas stood, tapping the microphone for attention. His voice trembled slightly. "Thank you all for coming. As many of you know, Ms. Caldwell was involved in an incident involving a wheel clamp and a guest vehicle. She was arrested by Greenfield County Police on charges that the HOA never formally sanctioned or authorized." A murmur spread through the crowd, and a hand shot up. "Didn't you say at the last meeting that no official policy existed for booting cars?" someone asked. Stephanie cleared her throat nervously. "Yes, that's correct. We had discussed potential updates to the parking bylaws, but no motion passed that would authorize the use of any device like a boot. Certainly, we never approved fines for such an action," Carl added. "In fact, we specifically concluded that we'd need further legal consultation before implementing any new parking rules." Ms. Caldwell appears to have taken it upon herself to interpret the guidelines in a creative way. Thomas interjected again. "We, as a board, want to clarify that Ms. Caldwell acted outside of her official capacity. The board does not condone illegal enforcement methods or extortionate fines." The audience broke into scattered applause at that statement, though some also demanded to know why the board had given Marjorie so much unchecked latitude all these years. Tensions soared as older residents recalled times they felt bullied by her. Younger families echoed the sentiment, complaining about petty fines for trivial issues. Thomas urged calm. "We're investigating the matter. For now, Ms. Caldwell is suspended from her treasurer role pending the outcome of her legal case. We'll hold a special election if she is unable to continue." Another wave of chatter erupted. Everyone had questions. Would Marjorie face jail time? Could the HOA be sued by Cindy Alvarez or by other residents who had suffered harassment? Who would reimburse Cindy for the towing fee or any damage to her car? The meeting ended with few concrete answers, but a collective sense that the era of Marjorie Caldwell's unbridled reign might be coming to a close. True to the neighbors' fears, the story soon made local headlines. The Greenfield Gazette ran an article titled, "HOA Official Arrested for Illegally Booting Resident's Car, Demanding Fees." It circulated quickly on social media, drawing comments that ranged from shocked disbelief to gleeful condemnation of overzealous HOAs. Marjorie Caldwell, having been released on bail, promptly sought an attorney. James Holt, a combative, high-priced lawyer known for representing controversial local figures. Holt wasted no time in firing back. He claimed that the HOA had given Marjorie broad enforcement powers and that the arrest was a miscarriage of justice. In a terse statement to the press, he insisted the charges would be dropped once the courts recognized the legitimate authority of Ms. Caldwell as treasurer. On the other side, Cindy Alvarez decided to consult a lawyer as well, exploring potential civil claims. After all, She had incurred towing expenses, potential damage to her wheel from the boot, and significant stress. Encouraged by neighbors who had endured various forms of harassment, Cindy seriously considered filing a lawsuit, not just against Marjorie, but possibly against the HOA itself for failing to rein her in. The board, meanwhile, scrambled to limit the association's liability. They issued repeated statements distancing themselves from Marjorie's tactics. Some members whispered about removing her from her post permanently, but the official bylaws required either a vote at a general meeting or a legal judgment that declared Marjorie unfit to serve. In the midst of this storm, Paula and Robert Sandoval tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. They were relieved Marjorie's aggression had been checked, but they also felt uneasy about living in a neighborhood plastered across the news. Bella and Jordan overheard gossip at school about the crazy HOA lady who'd been arrested. The children asked, wide-eyed, if they would have to move. Paula reassured them they wouldn't, but she couldn't deny a tiny voice in her mind that wondered if life would be simpler elsewhere. As weeks passed, the tension in Suncrest Park evolved into two starkly divided camps. Camp A, the sympathizers, a small group, believed that Marjorie was being unfairly targeted. They argued that her strictness kept property values high and crime low. "We knew the rules when we moved in," they said. "Don't break them, and you won't have trouble." They posted supportive messages on the neighborhood's online forum, praising her for maintaining order. Camp B, the reformers, significantly larger, this group ranged from those who merely disliked her tactics to those who had been personally harassed. They saw her arrest as long overdue justice. Many wrote letters to the board, demanding Marjorie's permanent removal. Others shared stories of threatened fines over trivial matters, calling for a wholesale review of the HOA bylaws. The online forum, usually devoted to yard sale announcements and lost pet alerts, became a battleground of fiery debates. Some users posted itemized lists of fines they had received from Marjorie over the years, pointing out how petty the infractions were. Others countered that rules are rules. Meanwhile, a hush spread in real life. Neighbors who previously said only a polite hello at the mailbox now either avoided eye contact or cornered each other to whisper about the drama. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, curiosity, and a sense of uncertain transition. Paula felt torn. On one hand, she disliked drama and preferred a peaceful life. On the other, she was relieved to see so many neighbors speaking out against Marjorie's tyranny. She even mustered the courage to type a short post in the community forum. "I think we can keep the neighborhood nice without intimidation or illegal enforcement. We should use this as an opportunity to improve Suncrest Park." Her post garnered supportive replies from many, along with a smattering of condemnation from Marjorie's allies. Yet it was clear that the tide had shifted. Far more people wanted reform than another iron-fisted leader. Greenfield County Courthouse scheduled a preliminary hearing for Marjorie's case about 6 weeks after her arrest. As the date loomed, the community buzzed with speculation. The charges included maliciously or unlawfully preventing the operation of a motor vehicle and attempted extortion, crimes that carried potentially serious consequences if proven in court. Marjorie's lawyer, James Holt, tried to paint her as a dutiful HOA official, simply carrying out her responsibilities. He insisted that the board had collectively decided on strict parking enforcement, and that the fiasco was caused by poor communication and a misunderstanding of the rules. Holt also claimed that the fine was not extortion, but a legitimate penalty under HOA bylaws. Cindy Alvarez's legal counsel had a different perspective. They pointed out that the so-called parking bylaw, under which Marjorie operated, was never officially passed or signed, and certainly not in compliance with county ordinances. They labeled the fine a ransom demanded under threat of continued immobilization, an act that fit the textbook definition of extortion. Moreover, they accused Marjorie of damaging Cindy's property and causing emotional distress. The HOA board hoped to avoid entanglement, repeatedly announcing that Marjorie acted alone. But they couldn't escape the fact that they had tolerated her extreme behaviors for years. Some neighbors wondered aloud if the entire association might be financially liable. The possibility loomed that Cindy, or others who had faced similar intimidation, would launch a class action lawsuit. For the moment, though, all eyes were on the upcoming hearing. If the judge ruled that sufficient evidence existed to proceed to a full trial, Marjorie faced a daunting legal battle. If the judge dismissed the charges, it could embolden her and her supporters to reclaim their old power. A light drizzle fell on the day of the preliminary hearing. Outside the courthouse, a small cluster of reporters and curious residents gathered. Word had spread that Marjorie Caldwell's arrest had struck a chord with many who felt HOAs often overstepped boundaries. Inside, the tension was palpable. Cindy Alvarez sat with her attorney, quietly determined. Paula and Robert Sandoval sat behind her for moral support. In another part of the gallery were a few of Marjorie's staunch supporters, arms folded and faces grim. Rachel Diaz, Shannon and Gwen, and other reformers also filled the rows, waiting to see if the justice system would support them. When Marjorie entered, dressed in a conservative gray pantsuit, her expression was a mixture of defiance and anxiety. James Holt, her attorney, walked stiffly at her side. The hush in the courtroom was absolute. The presiding judge, Judge Eleanor Bradley, took her seat and called the hearing to order. Over the next hour, the prosecutor laid out the evidence. Eyewitness testimony. Officer Glenn Hastings and Sergeant Elaine Powers recounted finding Marjorie physically placing a boot on Cindy's car and refusing to remove it without payment. Photographs. Cindy's attorney presented photos of the sedan's immobilized tire, as well as the fine notice that Marjorie attempted to issue on the spot. HOA records. The board's official minutes showed no approved resolution for such an enforcement measure. Several board members provided signed statements confirming no policy allowing car booting existed. James Holt argued that the judge should dismiss, citing that HOAs often enforce parking standards, and Ms. Caldwell believed in good faith she was authorized. But the prosecutor countered, good faith doesn't excuse the complete lack of any real authority, especially when it escalates to forcibly immobilizing a vehicle. Judge Bradley listened intently, then, after a short recess, delivered her decision. The evidence strongly indicates Ms. Caldwell acted beyond any reasonable scope of HOA authority. There is probable cause to proceed. We will set a trial date. A subdued cheer rippled through the gallery, while Marjorie stiffened, her face ashen. The wheels of justice were now fully in motion, and she was strapped in for the ride. Following the hearing, the atmosphere in Suncrest Park grew even more volatile. Marjorie, now awaiting a trial, essentially vanished from public view. Residents rarely saw her white SUV prowling the streets. Some speculated that her lawyer had advised her to keep a low profile. But the memories of her overreach still fueled daily conversations. A group of neighbors formed a coalition, Suncrest Forward, to advocate for sweeping HOA reforms. They pressed the board to revise or eliminate archaic bylaws and demanded greater transparency in how new rules were proposed. Meanwhile, Cindy Alvarez weighed whether to file a separate civil lawsuit against Marjorie for damages. Encouraged by friends, she also considered naming the HOA for failing to restrain Marjorie's extreme actions. Yet Cindy hesitated, concerned about dragging out the conflict. Paula and Robert did their best to focus on family life. Bella and Jordan thrived in school, making new friends, while Paula's freelance business flourished. But each time they saw an HOA email or a letter in the mailbox, their stomachs twisted with fear that more controversy loomed. Indeed, minor incidents continued to occur, a neighbor receiving a leftover fine from a past violation, or a snippy email from an anonymous account defending Marjorie. Such events kept the tension simmering. All the while, the trial date approached, overshadowing everything else. If convicted, Marjorie faced possible jail time or hefty fines. If acquitted, she might attempt to reclaim her board position, plunging Suncrest Park back into an even deeper divide. A month before the scheduled trial, a surprising piece of information surfaced. Certain board documents revealed that Marjorie had used HOA funds to purchase security devices. The invoice listed line items for vehicle immobilization equipment, among other things. This meant that not only had she unilaterally decided to boot cars, she had used HOA money to buy the boot in question. News of this broke at a Suncrest Forward meeting, where a frustrated Carl Renner, the board member at large, admitted they had found suspicious financial records. She never got official authorization for that purchase, but she coded it under community security enhancements. We only now realized what it was. The revelation ignited fury among residents. Some demanded Marjorie repay every cent. Others believed the entire board should resign for negligence. At a heated public forum, Thomas Griswold apologized profusely, explaining that he'd never seen the invoice details. Marjorie had full control as treasurer. This bombshell further undermined the defense's stance that Marjorie acted in good faith. If she had purchased a car boot and hidden it in the accounting, how could she argue ignorance of the rules? Word soon reached James Holt, who realized this new information could doom his client in court. He reportedly urged Marjorie to consider a plea deal, or at least restitution, to avoid a harsher sentence. But Marjorie, entrenched in her worldview, refused. She believed she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by ungrateful neighbors who didn't appreciate her efforts. At last, the trial date arrived. Crowds gathered outside the Greenfield County Courthouse. Neighbors, local reporters, curious onlookers drawn by the drama of a once powerful HOA official facing criminal charges. Over the course of several days, the prosecution laid out a meticulous case. Cindy Alvarez's testimony. She described returning from the Sandoval's home to find her car immobilized, with Marjorie demanding money to remove it. Police officers' accounts. Officer Hastings and Sergeant Powers recounted how Marjorie refused multiple requests to remove the boot before finally being arrested. HOA board statements. Multiple board members confirmed that no official policy allowed for car booting. They admitted feeling intimidated by Marjorie's demeanor, which had prevented them from questioning her actions sooner. Financial records. The invoice for the boot was introduced, along with evidence suggesting Marjorie had hidden the purchase. James Holt attempted a defense based on legal confusion and good faith enforcement, but the evidence was stark. The judge, the jury, and most observers found it difficult to believe Marjorie was unaware her actions were improper. The measure of planning, buying a boot, brandishing official-looking fine notices, forcibly attaching the device, seemed far beyond a simple misunderstanding. When Marjorie took the stand, her tone vacillated between righteous indignation and self-pity. She insisted she had only wanted to protect the neighborhood. She accused the board of abandoning her and the residents of ganging up against her. The prosecutor's cross-examination cut through these claims. Ms. Caldwell, you effectively held Ms. Alvarez's car hostage. You demanded $150, plus an hourly surcharge. That's not community protection, that's extortion. How do you justify that? Marjorie's answers were rambling. She claimed the board had vaguely discussed stricter parking control. She repeated that she believed the roads were entirely private. But each argument fell apart under scrutiny. After a concise set of closing arguments, the jury deliberated. The wait was tense for everyone in the courtroom. Finally, the jury filed back in, and the forepersons stood to deliver the verdict. Guilty on the count of unlawful immobilization of a motor vehicle. Guilty on the count of attempted extortion. A hush fell across the room. Marjorie's face turned ashen. Her supporters slumped in their seats. The reformers looked at each other in relief. At a separate sentencing hearing weeks later, the judge underscored the severity of Marjorie's conduct. You abused a position of trust, Judge Bradley admonished. In your quest to enforce rules, you violated fundamental legal boundaries, thereby causing fear and distress to your neighbors. Marjorie Caldwell stood stiffly, trying to maintain her composure. She had aged visibly during the trial, lines of stress etched into her face. The judge handed down the sentence. 6 months in county jail, with the possibility of supervised probation afterward. Mandatory restitution to Cindy Alvarez for towing costs, damages, and legal fees. A further financial penalty to reimburse the HOA for the misused funds that purchased the boot. The final blow came when the judge added, should you fail to make timely payments, your assets, including your property, will be subject to seizure. Marjorie's shoulders sagged. She glanced around, perhaps searching for a sympathetic face, but found none. She was led away in handcuffs to begin her custody, her once ironclad hold over Suncrest Park shattered. With Marjorie in jail, a new chapter began for Suncrest Park. A special HOA election took place. Rachel Diaz ran unopposed for treasurer and won by a landslide. Her first order of business was to conduct a comprehensive audit, revealing additional questionable expenses authorized by Marjorie, including over-the-top landscaping fees for her own yard. The board vowed to refund residents where possible, rework outdated regulations, and foster a more collaborative environment. Suncrest Forward, the group advocating reform, gained formal recognition within the community, helping shape policy changes and improve transparency. Neighborhood gatherings took on a friendlier tone. Potluck dinners replaced tense board meetings, and kids played without fear of petty HOA citations. For many, it was a huge relief. Meanwhile, Cindy Alvarez filed a civil suit to recover her costs and emotional distress. Marjorie, facing mounting debts and legal bills, was forced to list her house. The property languished on the market. Potential buyers were spooked by the infamous story of the HOA Karen. Eventually, the bank foreclosed. In the end, Marjorie's obsession with controlling others cost her everything: her standing, her freedom, and her home. As the months passed, the neighbors gradually stopped talking about Marjorie. The drama became a cautionary tale. Newcomers heard rumors of the car booting incident, but the deeper lessons lingered among the longtime residents. When an HOA official's lust for authority eclipses basic legal boundaries, the consequences can be dire. The Sandovals, for their part, flourished. Paula's parents visited often, unafraid to park on the street for hours at a time. Robert's career advanced, and Bella and Jordan reveled in the now relaxed neighborhood. Paula occasionally caught herself peering out the window, expecting to see that white SUV prowling by, but the street remained quiet and free. Suncrest Park's new motto, jokingly adopted at a community meeting, became a neighborly place, no boots allowed. It was half humorous, half serious, a final nod to the scandal that nearly tore the neighborhood apart, and a hopeful sign that the future would be more about cooperation than coercion.